Thank you for joining us today. My name is Laurie Tisharsky, and I am the Institutional Abuse Prevention Program Director at SCAN of Northern Virginia. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about 4 ways you can make your organization safer for children. And this is really just an introduction to institutional abuse prevention. Before we discuss abuse in organizations or other spaces, we always take a moment to remind ourselves that we have among us survivors and supporters of survivors who may feel strong emotions when we talk about this topic. We also understand that professionals who work with children carry biases, whether they be based on their own experiences or they just be that adults and professionals tend to identify with other adults and professionals. So it's important to sort of check those at the door and be willing to reflect on them and examine them. And as you do trainings with your staff, you might consider having a disclaimer that your discussion is private and that any stories that people share really belong to them and that they won't be shared without explicit permission. Our objectives for today are to address some of the common errors that happen in institutional abuse concerns and to think about what the initial steps or ongoing steps should be for your organization in making your spaces safer. I will provide you with some resources at the end. So it's helpful just to start with why your organization should work to prevent abuse. And of course, starting this journey, having conversations with your colleagues around your shared values will make your organization stronger, because we know when harm occurs in institutions, whether it be peer-on-peer abuse, whether it be employee misconduct, or children who've experienced harm elsewhere, that it does in fact impact your programs and the operations of your organization. You may also have, and likely do have, a legal and moral duty of care to the children in your programs. Really, when we think about what your organization controls, it's quite a lot. Your organization controls when a harm is discovered. Your organization can impact the escalation of harm. Your organization can also impact how a victim recovers from abuse or neglect. The kinds of harm we're talking about within organizations will primarily be peer-on-peer and adult-on-child within the organization, but we would also include your response to forms of harm that may occur outside the organization. We also know that you control how much your staff know, how able they are to identify and respond appropriately to harm and behaviors that are the result of harm. So really, there's a number of things that your organization can be doing to make children safer. Unfortunately, what we know from the headlines is that organizations don't tend to do a great job on this. We can think about recent cases that have made headlines, certainly national headlines around Boy Scouts of America. We know of a number of organizations that have taken a reputational approach and housed individuals who have harmed huge numbers of children. And certainly there's a number of reasons why organizations don't do a great job on this. And one is that the crisis decision-making process that happens in organizations very often can be very horizontal. So you end up having either one point of view or very similar points of view. We see that organizations tend to rely more heavily on a legal or reputational response, which is, of course, a legal response is one of your obligations, but you have other obligations like a victim-centered response and a management response as well. And within organizations, we can create spaces that might not be mitigating risk well, partly because of what our mission is. So really unpacking what your mission is, along with what inherent risks lie within that mission, is a really important part of institutional abuse prevention. So just starting with the first of the 4 steps to prevention in organizations is understanding the impact of child abuse and neglect on the child and on the operations of your organization. Beginning or extending your learning around positive and adverse childhood experiences is important, because you learn how they impact the brain architecture of the victim, as well as the behavior of the victim, and how professionals and your community can support recovery and resilience. So understanding features of harm, which we sometimes call signs and indicators, and the skills needed by children who have experienced abuse will make your mission easier to achieve, as well as keep children safe in your organization. The ACE study, which you may have be familiar with already, is a study done really almost 20 years ago now around the impact of adverse childhood experiences on an adult population's health. There were several outcomes of this study. One is that ACEs were common even in highly affluent, well-educated communities, and also that the more ACEs that a child or an adult experienced as a child, the more adverse behavioral and health outcomes they had. This study was done using just 10 features of adverse childhood experiences, because the physicians wanted things that could be prevented. So it was emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, upheaval in the home, a parent being arrested. We now know that really any childhood trauma of either a single incident or multiple incidents, so prolonged stress, can cause the same outcome. So we now see extended or modern ACEs that include things like generational trauma as a result of racism or discrimination, chaotic neighborhoods or violence in their community as additional ACEs. This study really is just unpacking how far-reaching childhood trauma is in a person's life. One of the things that we talk about here is that the word trauma really is referring to an individual's response. So it's important to remember that each individual has a unique experience to an overwhelming or dangerous event. We also use terms like resilience, which is the capacity for positive growth and change. That doesn't mean that you will shed the harmful experiences, but that you will change and grow from them. And it also includes the idea of there being protective factors or positive experiences and skills that can counterbalance adverse childhood experiences. And these are conditions that mitigate risk of future harm and increase well-being. So among the short and long-term impacts of abuse that we see from child abuse and neglect are those on this slide. And I want to point out here that not only are attachment difficulties and poor academic achievement on this list, we also understand that children who've experienced adverse childhood experiences will also have behavioral impacts that will be brought into your program. So things like dysregulation, children being triggered, and things like that. I think one of the questions that people often have about the ACE study is, why are some people seem to be more impacted than others? We understand that obviously the way you engage with trauma and harm, there's a number of factors at play here. So it could be any of these, but we know that the three most common and most impactful areas are the age you were when the harm occurred, your gender, because hormones play a big role in how the brain architecture is changed from toxic stress, and also the type of maltreatment that was experienced by the child. I think it's important also to remember that there's some other intersectional impacts here, that these are additive. So someone coming from a ethnic background where they experience discrimination or hate crimes is going to have a stronger response to that childhood trauma, and generally have less resilience to it than someone who doesn't have some of these intersectional factors going on. And so those intersectional factors could be race, it could be sexual orientation or identity, and it could be things related to your family culture or religion or geographic location. So I think we need to understand that we want to prevent these things from happening in our youth serving organizations and respond to them when they do, for a number of reasons. One is that 1/3 to 1/2 of all abuse is perpetrated by peers, by other children. And so, of course, where children are encountering other children is often in the corridors, classrooms, and fields of your organizations. So that's important. Also understanding that you as an organization, putting children together, are also choosing the adults who are around them, and those adults are trusted. So you have a role in sort of identifying adults as trusted individuals. We understand too that positive experiences and protective factors such as identity and support of organizations themselves play a big role in how a child will recover. The teaching of those resilient skills is also important. And we should recognize that in 2004, a study was done asking adults on a phone, in an anonymous survey on a phone call, whether they had experienced sexual abuse or sexual harassment by an employee of a school, and 1 in 10 had experienced those harms between kindergarten and 12th grade. So I think we need to acknowledge that this is not unusual. In fact, we would even say that harm is likely happening in your youth serving organization, more likely than not. So for this reason, the second step to creating a safer organization is to create a comprehensive child protection program. The reason we stress that it be comprehensive is because, of course, we know that just doing a background check on an employee or a volunteer is nowhere near enough to make sure that your organization is safe. In fact, a rights-based program would include not just safer hiring, programming, checklists, and approaches. It would also include training of staff in a number of factors, signs and indicators, grooming in institutions, what reporting looks like, and the disclosure process of children, how children who've been harmed behave in schools or youth serving organizations, all would be a part of that staff training. And we'd also expect to see outreach to caregivers and to children themselves in terms of what appropriate boundaries are with between adults and children in your organization. So what is different about institutional harm than the kind of harm that happens in a home? For one, we actually know that the harm that happens in a home is the minority of all harm that happens to children. Certainly the minority of sexual harm that happens to children under the age of 18. So we understand that whether we are a part of a faith community, a school, or a recreational program, we are going to have more potential victims for any one person who is the aggressor or the offender. We are likely to have bystanders or more people who can report or intercept that harm before it worsens. We know more people are impacted by this kind of harm. That there is a loss of support and very often a loss of access to whatever services your organization is providing, and a disruption. It could be an educational disruption. It could be a child that's musically talented not wanting to participate in music anymore if that's what your organization does. So institutional harm, just on the survivor and community side, before we even talk about what happens to the organization's reputation, is already going to have a huge impact. So your organizational structures do impact abuse prevention. You may wonder, how might my organization make it more likely that abuse would occur? Certainly we can see sometimes leadership or staff who tolerate or use minimizing language around abuse. This may be done just unintentionally, without knowledge of the harm that might cause, using terms like bullying when really something is abusive, using your knowledge that, say, a sports team might have an initiation practice that should be considered hazing or sexual hazing. These kinds of attitudes, particularly if sexual harassment is tolerated within the organization, we know for a fact that will increase the likelihood of sexual assault. And really a lack of training can sometimes make an organization what we call hospitable to abuse. That may look like purchasing a curriculum, for example, that teaches children about body autonomy or where the private spaces are in their bodies. And perhaps once that's delivered, a child starts to disclose or share information with a teacher who misses it or silences the child or doesn't believe the child. And then other children who might be bystanders to that may learn that that they don't want to disclose, that disclosure doesn't result in something positive for them. So you can create an environment that's actually less likely to have children come forward. Certainly the organization impacts both the speed and the effectiveness that institutional abuse in particular is addressed. Unfortunately, there are many ways that an organization can fail victims. What we typically see is an organization sort of, responding quickly and energetically, but also defensively and often in a legalistic way. How might this happen? I think that we understand that organizations sometimes like to formalize things. This is really speaking to this highlighted point of gatekeeping or bureaucratic obstacles. We put policies and procedures in place, and we like them to be followed. And if something, say, for example, a disclosure happens on social media rather than being reported to a staff member, we may feel like that's something that we can ignore. Or if we learn about something that happened not during our hours of operation or during our point at which we are in a supervisory role of children, feeling like we should tell young people, well, that's really nothing to do with us, when in fact that harm may be impacting the operations of your program as well, particularly if, and I'm referring to times when this is including other children in your program or other adults in your program. So that really does need to be owned by the organization. The other thing that we see organizations fail at is exceptionalizing offenses. So we refer to offenders as pedophiles or predators. It makes it very difficult for young people and adults in the organization to see the behavior of someone they care for or that they like, who's a good person, as being something harmful or boundary crossing. We understand that when we say it can't happen here, it makes us much less likely to believe allegations, and it makes it much less likely that victims will come forward and share what has happened. There's a number of things on this list also that can undermine us prioritizing child safety. So what are the options for you as an organization going forward? We here at SCAN are promoting and using the Johns Hopkins University Desk Guide for Leaders. That is for all youth-serving organizations, regardless of size, so everyone from schools all the way through to nonprofits or recreation programs, sports, childcare. But you can also find some good guidance on trauma-informed initiatives for clinicians. At NCTSN, there is a U.S. Center for Safe Sport, which is a part of the IOC, also has a framework for sports and recreation organizations. There's frameworks for businesses that serve youth either directly or indirectly, and a number of other kind of procedural and structural approaches. But I'm going to just introduce you briefly to the Johns Hopkins Desk Guide, and we do have a longer training, a 1 hour that goes into each of these 8 overarching goals in a little more depth for you. So that should be something you can look out for. So here you'll see the 8 goals of the Johns Hopkins program. And this you can see is a comprehensive program. It starts with signposting around your duty of care to prioritize child safety and well-being. It includes training, it includes situational and facility audits around interactions between adults and children and peers. It collaborates with caregivers and with children. It is sort of it's a risk mitigation approach as well as a rights-based approach. And we will see that it includes safer hiring. We're not going to go into this today, but I would say that if you're looking for an audit of what you're currently doing, this program can also function as an audit, and the link is here as well. So where do you start? The starting point generally is to task a number of employees with looking at what your current policies are, what your current practices are, looking at your facility, and learning more about what the prevalence is, what offending might patterns might look like in your organizations. I'm speaking about grooming behavior largely in institutional abuse, but also peer-on-peer and online abuse prevention, conducting some audits. By the way, that team would be involved in sort of a mapping exercise. So we're really not talking about that traditional, well, this is someone from the board and a senior leader and maybe an HR person, although all of those shouldn't be involved. It should also include maybe a parent representative, depending on the age of the kids in your program, maybe even a child representative. But this team should look more vertical. It should include, for example, coaches, if you're a recreational association or you've got recreation as a part of your programming. It should include vertically the people who are working directly with children so that there's buy-in. And I think that's probably the single most important part of this, is that it not be adversarial, that it be sort of a nothing about us without us approach. So some pitfalls to avoid. The first one on here, I don't mean to be alarming, but this is the kind of idea that we can solve a problem just by buying something. The idea that we can just write a check, put this on a child, and we're done with the discussion. Like most problems, societal problems, this has a lot of nuance around it. It takes a lot more effort to do a good job of it. certainly not being transparent about this process. I know that organizational leaders sometimes will say, well, won't people think that we're having a problem with employee abuse or misconduct if we start looking at child protection? Instead, my experience has really been that caregivers are very keen. Young people are very keen to learn more about how to stay safe and knowing where they stand, what communications are supposed to look like in the organization, and what boundaries are being observed. All of this, your community will welcome. The other thing, of course, is that we may take this approach and not be trauma-informed. This is a term you've probably heard said and seen around. If you are new to this, this may be your first step into trauma-informed approaches. The trauma-informed approaches we're talking about as supporting institutional prevention is really something we sometimes refer to as a trauma lens. So we'll be looking at our program through multiple lenses, but when we apply a trauma lens, we're thinking about what youth serving organizations have historically done, how adults who are caregivers within your organization may have found that organizations such as yours have perpetuated abuse. For example, perhaps your organization is, soccer or swimming, and coaches are seen to have been in the past verbally abusive or perhaps physically abusive. Know that some of the caregivers who are coming to that organization and some of the children coming to that organization may have those expectations in mind, may already have been victimized. And so we're going to apply that trauma-informed lens to both the individual child, but also to the staff who are there. So understanding what the expectations are of staff, and how our systems work together. I'll give you another example. In a school, you will understand that if you add a trauma-informed lens, we know that groups who have been historically marginalized might not feel safe in your spaces. You might see them not wanting to come in for, or being less likely to come into school spaces for things like parent-teacher conferences. Individual children who've experienced harm within school systems may act out in class, may be low achievers. We need to understand the trauma history of some of the, or the vulnerabilities of some groups of people in our organization. So really vulnerable groups can really be all children, of course, but for example, boys in an all-boys setting are highly vulnerable. Children who identify as LGBTQIA+ are highly vulnerable. Children with disabilities, whether visible or invisible, would be children who likely are already coming into your organization with some experiences of trauma and harm. And so looking at them through that lens, understanding how to mitigate risk and strengthen their safety is a really important part of an overall institutional abuse prevention program. Just to explain that often what we see applied to this approach to institutional prevention is sort of an organizational mission approach or a lens of what are our legal obligations. So you often see kind of a tick box approach to policies and procedures, and also to sort of understand that our organizations were designed by adults for adults. And so adding that trauma-informed lens, adding in a lens that focuses on, for example, rights-based child protection, so children giving consent, ensuring that they have voice and agency in your organization, understanding the need for having some adults that look like the children that you're serving, are all important pieces of an overall institutional abuse prevention program. And finally, the fourth step is to exhibit your commitment. This one is really critical and often can be seen as something you can do pretty quickly, that has a really big impact. One is just sort of pivoting away from this idea of it can happen here and understanding deeply all of your senior leadership as well as staff that your organization has a role to play, that it's instrumental, not incidental, to harm that occurs within the organization. So what might that look like? Exhibiting your commitment. It could be a statement on your website that you're an organization that promotes child safety above all other considerations. Certainly, we'd expect to see that in job descriptions if that was your top priority, that every role has a responsibility to keep children safe. We would expect to see that in your position applications and your position descriptions when you have vacancies. We would expect to see language around this topic being used regularly in staff meetings. So understanding that what messaging you're putting out to your community is keeping your organization safer. We know that if you are seen to have a high barrier to offending, situational offending, you will keep out around 80% of people with an intention to harm. And that's in terms of adults joining your organization. So this messaging really can't be understated. Here is an example of a belief statement. This happens to be for our program and our organization. We believe all organizations have a legal and moral obligation to protect children and support the creation of safer systems responsible for their care, is the one we use. But you should work together as an organization and base those on your shared understanding. Another way that you can sort of walk the talk out in your community is to join coalitions and multidisciplinary teams. So this is just one example of the trauma-informed community network for Loudoun County. Every county in Northern Virginia has some kind of organization like this, community networks. Also partnering with your within your community, and those that are sort of program partners, asking them, what is your child protection policy? If, for example, you're going to use our facilities to run a program, how are your staff trained? What is your code of conduct? What boundaries are observed? How are adults interacting with children? Perhaps even sharing training with those partner organizations is a great way to start. This isn't something that happens overnight. This isn't something two people can just do in a couple weeks or a month. This is a phased change in your organization. And so really you're starting with creating a deeper understanding of child abuse within institutions, and moving towards staff training, those supplemental policies, once you have your policies in place, understanding what being trauma-informed looks like for your organization. And then finally, being an advocate, speaking to children and parents and caregivers, and promoting those positive supportive factors and protective factors and resilience skills. If you are looking for training, SCAN is very happy to be a training partner with you. You'll see that there's a number of different trainings that we offer. We offer regular trainings every month, or you might wish to make an appointment with us to discuss an internal training for your own staff that's unique to your organization. This all goes all the way from very general trainings that are sort of similar to mandated reporter trainings that cover all of those topics for staff, into the deeper learning needed by human resource professionals, child protection designates, and others who have like school nurses or healthcare providers that might need deeper understanding of these topics. So it's important to think about what you might want to work on, how you might start with talking to colleagues, whether you will add this to a staff meeting, get some initial training, perhaps put a committee together to audit your policies or your facilities. and generally to make sure your programs are fully comprehensive. Just a few tips on talking to colleagues and other professionals. Really, a great place to start is your shared values around children's rights. The descriptions of abuse really aren't, as many people think, part of culture or what's written by legislatures about what's illegal. Really, those definitions of abuse are based on children's rights. And what you want to do is make sure that you meet your colleagues where they are. And I'm having lots. Sorry, there are a lot of alerts popping up on my computer there. So you'll see some of our tips here, listening, asking questions, particularly identifying colleagues who represent supporters of survivors or survivors themselves, starting discussions, and identifying and rewarding champions are all places for you to begin this journey. We have some resources that you can find on our website that includes a one-pager at a glance of a summary of some of the things that I've talked about here, as well as a link to the Moore Center Desk Guide for Leaders and some of the other programs that might be more appropriate for your organization. Here, if you want to just use your another device and take a quick view of this QR code, you can download the Moore Center program immediately. This is a chance, if you happen to be with a direct or indirect youth serving business, this is another option for you. This is out of Unicef, and you'll see some of the steps here align with the desk guide. And finally, just think about, take a moment for reflection, pause the video, and think about how you can incorporate these ideas and this language, particularly language around rights-based child protection, trauma-informed practices and approaches, how you can incorporate this into your organization, and who you might be able to activate as an ally or a partner in this process. And do share this video with them so that you can begin the discussion from the same starting point. This video of Rachel Den Hollander is a great one to watch. She, at the end of her victim statement, talks a little bit about youth serving organizations. And if you're doing any training with staff, this might be something to listen to. I'm not going to play it here. You can find it on YouTube. And really her entire victim statement, I think, speaks to the heart of what we as professionals, as youth serving professionals, need to be thinking about when we're taking up this work. Finally, just remember that this is a journey. We're so appreciative that you're starting it. You can find us at SCAN online, scanva.org, or you can send an email to AIPC, that's Allies in Prevention Coalition, at scanva.org, or to me personally. And thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. There is no doubt that what you are doing will make children safer in your organization.